Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Today is Friday, August 12th. We're starting fairly late on this Friday. I got distracted, and then when I finally did sit down to try and actually um, have start streaming, my computer, probably because of a Windows update, had messed up the OBS settings and the audio, which this seems to happen fairly frequently. Um, Frequently enough that it's actually kind of an issue. Although I am also running the old version of OBS, and at this point I probably will just skip over from my current version to the version after the next version. Um, let's see. So they've made some revisions apparently to the Duelist Cups. The DLV will not drop between 2 to DLV and Duelist level won't drop between 2 and 15, nor will it drop below 17 and 20 after receiving them. So if we make it to 17, you're safe. If you make it to 20, and then, but it can drop more than 2 levels, where apparently they thought it couldn't. Maybe they had intended to program that way and it didn't happen. I'm testing out running a VPN server on my router, and when I finally got that to work, so it wasn't that long of a issue, but when I went into that, I changed some settings to try to get faster speeds. It does kind of feel like some of the setup I have was wrong, but I may have pushed it too far now, because I'm noticing that we're getting these tiny frame drops and disconnections from the server of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so we may have an awkward experience today where we lose connection for half a second and maybe start losing a lot. I suspect that might be a timeout issue. I lowered the timeout to a particularly crazy level. A lot of the things, even on my high-end router, are going to kind of quickly stop being useful. I'm just going to end the turn here and not play any card at all. Because so much seems like it's going to be moving from the TCP to the UDP older standard, with more newer technology hidden inside the UDP standard, enough that that significant percentages, maybe even 50% or more of internet traffic may go back to being UDP, at least as how it is seen by most routers, without doing some de-encryption. Which, yeah, that probably is the better direction to go, as far as how that probably is the better direction to go, as far as just how the internet should be secured, is that there should be close to zero opportunities for a router or any device in the middle to do much of, or to really even understand the traffic that's happening between point A and point B, the client and the server. What does this say? Let's just counter this ability and see. Nope, I just counted my own ability. That was dumb. Oops. Unless this guy is playing the Duelist Cup to actually lose, which would be fairly crazy. I assume he's got some kind of strategy here. And apparently, I can't activate this trap because maybe I don't have enough cards? It seems crazy that if you discarded 10 cards, you wouldn't have at least 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the nose as far as 4 monsters. I finished Max Curse of Brotherhood, and then I looked at the achievements on it and pretty much realized that it's not really worth it to continue to play. And the game's just locked up there. Maybe that was a network thing or what, because the animations that were cycling were still going on, so that would almost have to be a network thing and not a CPU or GPU thing. I never had another issue with the video card crashing, so I do think that was just a one-time fluke with Max Curse of the Brotherhood. That being said, there also has been a lot of light usage in the past couple of months as far as actively playing on my computer and pushing the video card. I made about 3 weeks worth of footage with Max by making fairly consistent 30-minute episodes, which still probably leaves me a week short of footage, but maybe I can get close enough to October to schedule that and be done with that, and then start scheduling the Halloween month content. Otherwise, I have a backup plan if that doesn't work. Is now the time to really activate this tornado? Probably not. But yeah, I really couldn't recommend Max Curse of Brotherhood to anybody. It has a pretty awful boss fight that comes out of nowhere at the very end. And you really haven't done any boss fights up until that point. In fact, you've done 0 boss fights up until that point. I would agree that that is the case. This is gonna suck when it turns out that I'm gonna end up special summoning just a 2 monster. It also has some chase sequences Max Curse of Brotherhood does that aren't that good, and they're far too frequent. And in general, it is a game that is split between a lot of slow puzzle platforming sections at the beginning, and then near the 2/3 mark, it starts to become much more action, timed platforming, precision platforming things that aren't programmed particularly well by any means. It's very bad gameplay physics and mechanics to it. So yeah, it's real hard to see a scenario where anybody would like Max Curse of the Brotherhood when there are better choices. If you want more beat 'em up action, I would say you probably would want something like the American McGee's Alice series for platforming plus beat 'em up action. And I think American McGee going with that dark twisted Alice in Wonderland theme gives you a much better story than Max Curse of the Brotherhood, because Max really is a game that is designed to look like it's for kids. If it's for anybody, it is a kid's game, and yet it's not actively good at being a kid's game because it's far too difficult. It doesn't help you at all. You just die over and over and over again, and that's one of the reasons why I gave up on any hope of getting all the achievements, is that there was specific achievements about doing some of the hardest levels without dying, and that's just not going to happen. In fact, I'm surprised that even 4% of players were able to get some of those achievements without dying, or beat the levels without dying. There's just cheap deaths around every corner in the game. Is there a way I could do a little bit more damage on this turn? Because I only needed to do 300 more. I don't think there is. But yeah, the VPN I'm using is Wireshark, and I'm only using it for cell phones. So it's not like my PC that I'm playing with right now is going through it. When my internet is working well, I'm getting 200-300 megabits up and down, which is very good internet speed, although it could always be better. And it could frankly be more consistent per connection, per actual client to server connection, although maybe that is just a bunch of servers honestly don't allow for don't have the bandwidth themselves for 100-200 megabits connections. But when I go through the Wireshark on my phone, the VPN, to go back to my house, you're losing like 50 megabits per second out of 300, so it's not like you're always going to lose 50. If you had a 100 megabit connection, you wouldn't lose 50 in that case, but you would lose. How much attack does this guy have? You would lose probably about the same percentage wise. So if I'm losing 50 out of 300, that's 1/6. You could assume that you're losing about 1/6, which is way better than OpenVPN, it claims. So I will take that as truth, because that is somewhat believable. You're always going to lose speed in VPN. On the other hand, for my setup, it increases the DNS crypt, and it keeps everything coming from one IP address, and it allows me to connect to my internal Samba file sharing on my router backup. It allows me to connect to the Tableau over-the-air DVR that I have even when I'm not inside my own network. Now, notably, I have a dash cam that at some point in the future I would like to replace with a newer, better one. But the dash cam creates its own Wi-Fi network, so when I tried to check that, the VPN wouldn't allow it to connect because it's trying to go through the VPN first. Not a big deal. You just exclude that app. In Android, you can just exclude any app that is kind of weird, or any app you want to exclude. I had hoped that I could exclude WireGuard itself. That way it could do dynamic DNS lookup, and then I could tell it to keep the VPN on at all times and block traffic otherwise, which is a default setting for Android phones, but no such luck. If you exclude WireGuard from connecting, the whole thing just crashes. What it needs to do is you would either need something that could do a DNS lookup by default and exclude that separate app, which I don't know if there is an app like that. They would add DNS lookup to the DNS tables of Android. But that's only an issue if you're using a dynamic DNS. If you just have a static IP address for your server, you're fine. And if your IP address only changes on a rare occasion, you can look it up yourself and adjust the settings. It was a fairly easy setup, but obviously it took me a day to figure out the right settings to get it to work. And I do think it is basically a night and day difference from what it used to be to try to get WireGuard to set up on DDWRT. It used to be, I think, a lot of command line, install this special program, and now it is just built into the beta version of the web graphical user interface, and it gives you a nice little QR code to give to each person to just scan, or in a file if you want to use a file instead. I don't know what happens if two different people try to use the same credentials to connect, but it seems fairly obvious that the idea is to give a different QR code for every single person and assign effectively a static IP address to every single client, which that could be a nightmare, certainly. In many cases where you're going to end up having 5 to 10, if it's a business, 20 to 100 or more people that might have a phone, a laptop, a tablet, and you would have to then each hand them a QR code to scan for each of those devices to get to the VPN. But it's really a one-time setup and then forget it. And then Android puts a little key in the top right of your phone once you have it installed. And so now I'm just really running a burn-in test and just making sure everything works. But I don't think that's really probably would cause the thing that's causing any problems with my network. If anything is really causing any problems with my network, what is probably causing problems is the timeouts being changed, because I just started fiddling with settings basically, which I shouldn't do, on my router. And obviously you can tell I'm more enthusiastic about messing with my router than I was about playing Max Curse of Brotherhood. But yeah, turning the timeout settings to low is probably the problem. I also turned up the transmission queue length on specific ports. By default, they were at like 1,000, and I told it to go up to 9,999, which was the maximum it would take. And that's generally just telling it to go ahead and have a lot more traffic go through before you start filling up the buffers and giving up with and dropping packets, as it were. But I don't think my router actually is dropping any packets anyways. Right, well, we could at that point summon something, but are we at the point where we want to do that? Let's see, drop this here, put that here, activate this, and then activate nothing else, put that in the graveyard, activate this, activate nothing else, put that on in the hand, and this should be enough now to win. Not only should this be enough to win, this should be enough to counter any counters he might have had. Okay. These two cards in particular do set yourself up very nicely. See, I could attack with this to do a little bit more damage, but it's not like you're getting specific rewards for doing specific amounts of damage. So yeah, I messed with my router too. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be said about that. Oh, there was something that I was messing with my Wi-Fi, as I have a tendency to do, where I changed the frequency channel for the 5 gigahertz and put it back to being the same Wi-Fi name, SSID broadcast name, as the 2.4 gigahertz. But what seems to have been the problem as to why that may have not worked in the past is because I had it at channel 100, where 149 seems to work better. A lot of my like Roku TVs, for instance, really should have been on the 5 gigahertz to get much better speeds, because there is a cap certainly at 2.4 gigahertz now that is a little too low, where you're going to get 60-70 megabits per second, and when you're talking 1080p or 4K or 2K content and streaming, that there are just these hiccups and hitches, and that's what I'm trying to eliminate. Is I want something to buffer at the beginning. I want Netflix to buffer at the beginning, and then make it all the way to the end without any problems. And connecting to the 5 gigahertz helps there. So one of the things, since the 2.4 gigahertz by default should be 20 megahertz bandwidth, you shouldn't do anything else higher than that, just for standards reasons if you have an option. But the 5 gigahertz should be at 40 gigahertz, not 80, not 160, just and not dynamically 20 or 40. It should just be at 40, double the 2.4 gigahertz. That way devices can say very quickly, or determine that, well, this one is twice as wide in the bandwidth or the channel width at the 5 gigahertz. Let's prefer the 5 gigahertz connection over the 2.4 gigahertz connection with the same SSID and broadcast name. And those there seems to be some fairly tight rules that you can't play around with in Wi-Fi for a lot of devices. Otherwise, that doesn't work. But I got that. I did that, and it did very quickly change from really just two phones connecting to the 5 gigahertz to several other devices going, oh, I can now see the 5 gigahertz network because it's on a different channel and it's at the right broadcast channel width, probably just because it was on a different channel, and they started to connect more. Which at a certain level, that means there's going to be more of a better connection where things that stream, things that want a lot of bandwidth and deserve a lot of bandwidth, Roku TVs, for instance, are going to now try and be on that 5 gigahertz, and that will actually free up space in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum for some of these Internet of Things devices that I'm using to take this small amount of bandwidth connection speed that they're using and have more room. And so it's going to leave slow devices that don't really need a lot of speed on the 2.4 and move more things towards the 5 gigahertz. I'm hoping, one would hope that a Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7 or Wi-Fi 8 at a certain point would start to get a lot of devices to move to a new technology and a lot of devices to be replaced. Of course, that creates e-waste if you're actually concerned about e-waste. But it's a similar scenario certainly has been happening with things such as the what am I trying to think of, USB-C standard that we finally, through threat of legal action and actual legal action, we finally started to see most devices get replaced and only use USB-C. I have only a couple of devices left that are still on micro USB, and I'm hoping that USB-C stays as a physical connector standard good for a very long time. Of course, at some point, something's gonna change, but my general hope would be we would just have better wireless connectivity standards, even maybe for power, or even quantum connectivity, if that pipe dream ever happened. If I activate this one and then put this in the graveyard, activate this, do the same old, but yeah, if Wi-Fi as a standard became more of a thing, yeah, that would be nice. Of course, that also points out an interesting thought that even if we did get quantum networking, the protocols and the technology behind that could still consistently improve. So there's no guarantee that we would ever top out on a technology. And there's no guarantee that all new technology is good technology. The National Institute of Standards and Technology put out 4 proposed elliptical curve algorithms, and one of them was beaten just using a single core CPU in a matter of hours and cracked. And I believe these proposed algorithms were suggested by the NSA, so that there's this constant mistrust that the NSA creates for itself, in that they recommend these specific algorithms or specific numbers, and then those specific numbers turn out to be very bad. And the assumption is that they're just trying to have backdoors in quantum elliptical curve encryption. That's one thing about WireGuard, is that you can have you can only really connect with a private key public key handshake, which I don't believe is probably using elliptical curve keys, because they don't seem to be that long, but they could be. But then you can also have a pre-shared key on top of that, which I guess a key on top of a key probably is a good idea. Do I have anything else to talk about in the accountability section, though? No, I don't think so. And today is setting itself up to probably be a fairly long stream, so we should move forward in with the news and everything. I also started late, and so going late into the evening. I'm also waiting for a package that is consistently saying it's in transit, even though it was supposed to be delivered like yesterday or 2 days ago. Nope. But I assume the package is not going to be delivered today. Alright, well, Cyan has put out some in-progress footage of their game Firmament, which is visually at least supposed to be kind of a spiritual reboot, spiritual successor to Myst. It seems to me, having watched this before and just kind of skipping right now, like they're going to try and keep the world a little bit more consistent. It'll be bigger. There is a question certainly as to how many puzzles there will be there, because it could very well be that there is very few puzzles actually in the game, or toys and interactive objects on top of just seeing architecture all over the place. Remember, they also already released Abduction, and best case scenario you could say is that Abduction was Cyan really rushing to put out a game and prove that they were back. Not 100% actually proving that they still have the skills and the chops to make something like Myst should be if it was made today, because Abduction really is a one gimmick game in a relatively medium-sized world. But yeah, your hope would be is that they're taking their sweet time, because they announced Firmament like 2 or 3 years ago to make the game and polish it, and that they're really going to make a full experience there. Because for Firmament to really succeed in the minds of Myst fans, it's going to have to do something to stay in the backs of minds of Myst fans for probably 10 years. And that's going to be a very tall order. You're not going to be able to get away with just a 5-hour game with a few puzzles. Meanwhile, you have things like Escape Academy or The Witness to compete against Firmament, whereas Myst didn't really have any competition when it originally came out. I think at this point it would be probably a bad idea if Firmament went heavy in having live action characters or anything like that. Any live action characters or any narrative that you got bogged down in, which is what happened in the Myth series. Well, that's no good. Well, Hideo Kojima put out a Twitter tweet here saying it's been 8 years since the playable teaser was out and then quickly abandoned by Konami because they canceled Silent Hills, which was all the playable teaser was a teaser to Silent Hills. And then you have Guillermo del Toro putting FK, which I have to assume stands for fuck Konami, as he's retweeting this, which he was, I think, in part involved in the idea of making a new Silent Hills and the playable teaser. But what you see here more than anything, I would say, is a lack of professionalism. Like, Konami is garbage, and Konami has already proven itself to be garbage. Anybody in the know knows that they pretty much hate Konami, although lately Konami has tried to win back some hearts and minds. But Hideo Kojima has moved on to his own company. He's made Death Stranding. There's just not a good reason for him to even mention PT at this point, let alone have one of his friends, or at least business friends, white knight him and retweet it. If I was Hideo Kojima, maybe I would say, okay, maybe it's been 8 years. Let's put out a PT thing. But then I would contact Guillermo and say, hey, please take that down because that's inflammatory and we may actually do business with Konami at some point in the future. Or we may want to buy Silent Hills from Konami at some point in the future. You're really irritating people and fighting old fights. It's just not good business. Interestingly, too, this PT image doesn't mean anything to me. I don't think I've ever seen this. If this was some internal document, maybe this was just a stock image of a forest and then PT has just been put on top of it. Maybe this is a piece of art that's not even owned by Konami technically. But this is not very informative as a picture anyways. And maybe this is supposed to be a gravestone. I guess that maybe is the idea here. But yeah, they have better things to do with their time, or they should have better things to do with their time than rehash PT. Sure, people still love PT and all of that, but that doesn't mean anything. Oh, here's Hideo Kojima showing a retweet for the Love and Death and Robots Netflix series. This was the episode that I honestly don't feel like was actually animated, where every episode is supposed to be animated in Love, Death, and Robots, or at least rotoscoped. And this looked so good and so realistic, this episode, that I honestly think it was just people that maybe slightly had a filter over the film to try and make it look like it was not real people. So either they did a really good job or they cheated. And this is some kind of like Persian Indian twist on a mermaid, so, or a siren, and her skin is just covered in all these jewels and things. It's taking a sweet amount of time there. I have yet to win even a single time because the player didn't spend too much time. The tweet I wanted to point out here, though, he may have actually taken down. But yeah, you can definitely see he's retweeting a lot of people, retweeting PT. And then he's typing in Japanese, so anything would have to be translated by Twitter. Yeah. So this is his original tweet here. And it's written in Japanese, but I assume that is just, it's been 8 years. Let's see. 8 years ago. Alright. If anything, the fact that he has so much time to be on Twitter in general does imply that Hideo Kojima doesn't have enough work. And that's a problem for his fans, and that's a problem for him. Certainly, he should be far too busy. Unless he has somebody else tweeting for him, and if that's the case, he probably should tell the person tweeting for him to not be so obsessed with PT. And instead be more obsessed around Death Stranding in particular. I suppose I should also mention I watched Lock and Key Season 3, which went by fairly fast and honestly felt like it was probably just rehashing a lot of what happened in Lock and Key Season 2. I feel like what probably happened is Season 2 covered most of the Lock and Key comic books and left only maybe 2 volumes left, and then that led to them rehashing and stretching for a 3rd season. 3rd and final season, which brings about an interesting question as to, are we really at the point now where 50 episodes or 12, 24, 36 episodes is enough for reruns and syndication in Netflix's case? Because there's no way really that there would be a season 4, or it would be at least very hard for there to be a season 4 of a Lock and Key. And season 3 definitely wasn't particularly interested in showing a lot of new keys or doing anything different there. Like, so I imagine as a comic book series there was a chapter, at least one issue, that was focused around each specific key and a lot of credibility or creativity put around what each key does. But in the 3rd season in particular, there's a lot of just reusing old keys that people had already seen, barely using keys that people had already seen. Let's see. special summon this. This. I want to see if the animation plays again when we do that. What also kind of sucks around Lock and Key now being turned into a Netflix TV series is that you have this situation where if you wanted to make another story with magical keys, which is a good idea, you're going to have to bend over backwards to not feel like you're just copying the same keys and the same effects of keys as Lock and Key did. Whereas had it just stayed a comic book, very people would have recognized that. They're actually doing a Quantum Leap reboot, which that is kind of the same situation where it's going to feel somewhat weird to try and redo something that's already been done, even if it is a reboot. The Quantum Leap reboot also will inevitably, if you're not careful, if they're not extremely careful, it's going to get complaints from both sides for going either too far or not far enough, because the Quantum Leap series was kind of pushing the limit of what people would put up with and tolerate as far as left progressive ideas, and a modern version of that is going to have a lot of gay people, a lot of trans, a lot of LGBTQ plus stories told over and over again. I think I screwed up here. But yeah, if you are going to watch Lock and Key, which it probably is worth watching, you should probably marathon all the seasons in one run. And I think that is probably another example of where Netflix is failing to make a reoccurring, interesting form of entertainment. Like, it does just kind of feel like they are only making things that are designed to be marathoned, and once you've marathoned them, it's going to be at least 10 years for most people before you would ever want to watch them a second time, because they're not going to ever get lucky enough to make something like The Office where you have people just watching the same show over and over again. They learned the wrong lessons, almost certainly, around the success of shows like The Office. Instead of seeing those as, oh, well, that's a 1 in a million lucky series that people really love and can watch over and over again, instead of trying to just hope that all of their creations are like The Office. I also heard that they kind of negotiate a little too aggressively, and they're kind of uncreative, so somebody definitely had a beef and was spilling some tea, for lack of a better term, about their failed negotiation with Netflix, and then they went over to Amazon Prime instead. And he was actively telling his friends not to sign any contracts with Netflix. And he was actively saying it was the lawyer being incredibly aggressive, and then when he walked away from negotiations, they then claimed they owned every idea and threatened him after the fact in these like pre-production meetings before any kind of contract had even been signed. Which I wouldn't be surprised if that's true, certainly. Ironically, and I'm still not talking about video game news 50 minutes into this, I'm really just rambling today. The Office is a series, though, on Netflix that wasn't made for Netflix, wasn't made by Netflix, and was made for that weekly episode-to-episode type of ingestion. On top of which, The Office storyline, I don't think particularly connects from episode to episode, so you can watch episodes fairly well out of order and still get a decent experience. Whereas the marathoning of effect of watching things in order on Netflix does not highlight that, and the marathoning effect doesn't highlight the episodes being able to be watched out of order, nor does it highlight the effect of episodes not having to have a long, continuous narrative in every episode. So Lock and Key as a concept, if you're going to reboot it, and arguably even the Sandman TV series, they might have wanted to consider doing something like that too, where it would be, this is going to be standalone episodes of Lock and Key where we're going to find a key and we're going to use that key and go on an adventure for 1, 2, maybe 3 episodes, but that's it. And instead of having a big bad guy introduced at the beginning of a season and then defeated at the end of a season. And the third season of Lock and Key in particular foreshadowed the idea of how you would stop the big bad guy, which would have been fairly creative, and instead they didn't stop the big bad guy that way, so it didn't matter at all. Like the first episode of season 3 doesn't really matter. But yeah, I could see trying to do Lock and Key and just going 5 seasons, and I mean, it's a simple enough premise that magical keys appear all over the place. They seem to magically kind of just appear in the key house no matter what. I don't think they were all created and crafted by previous generations of locks, but maybe they were. Even at that, there's enough previous generations of locks that you could have a lot of different keys and an infinite number of keys. And those could just be standalone episodes, something like Charmed, where Charmed is kind of a great example of a Monster of a Week show until they started to go against that idea and make it more of linear narratives in later seasons. But if anything, Charmed isn't a particularly great series. I'm talking about the original Charmed series, but it manages the best of both worlds in that it was allowed to both have a few seasons of Monster of the Week type content and then also have linear narratives content, which ideally that is probably what you want, is that when you're past season 3, season 4, you should probably start thinking about wrapping things up and having an overarching plot line reveal itself for those 5 seasons. Supernatural is kind of a example of that too, where the first 5 seasons that it was intended to go for were mostly Monster of the Week, with one yellow-eyed demon being the big bad guy at the end of the first 5 seasons. And Supernatural is just so incredibly popular, although assumedly not actually successful enough to make CW succeed, that it just kept on going for, I believe, 15 seasons. if not more than 15 seasons. But even in the later seasons of Supernatural, there still were the occasional standalone episodes that they were able to have, which gave it a different feeling from like the shows on Netflix, where really there's not a single episode in season 3 of Lock and Key that is its own standalone episode. It's just a long story, and you see what that eventually did to Stranger Things, where you're having these nearly 2-hour movies called episodes in the latest season of Stranger Things. It just they're somebody needs to come in and put some restraints on the writers, or perhaps there just needs to be a higher emphasis on episode counts in general. Netflix has never once actually advertised a show based on the number of episodes or the amount of runtime. So it would, I assume, be that their internal metrics are all based on runtime, when arguably they should probably advertise episodes. If you took every single show available to watch on Netflix, you could do like Google does and say we have billions, if not trillions, of videos and quadrillions of hours of video to watch. But Netflix in particular could put out a much bigger number than I think Amazon Prime or Hulu or any other service could put out, as far as this is the amount of videos to watch. Maybe Amazon Prime has... It could be that Amazon Prime has a lot more videos to watch, because Amazon Prime lets pretty much anybody put any video on their service for rent. So if they added it up, maybe they could put a big number out there too. So if you were going to go that way and advertise Netflix to say we have 1 quadrillion hours of... over a quadrillion hours of content, I would also emphasize the phrase good content, or quality content. Alright, well, let's screw around with this guy. For the first time, my program / macro to open up news did activate the thing it needed to activate to make me have to log in to Steam, and it didn't quite work. So I will have to go through some news and then come back and go through some things and then come back and do some other stuff. So I'll be slightly out of order as far as my Chrome tabs today. And hopefully I fix that so that won't be an issue in the future. I think the trick here may very well be to have tossed this card, then bring back this card, and then because if I brought back this card, it would have let me toss another card in the graveyard. You know what? I don't know why I'm not doing this. toss that one. There was a video I found from a YouTuber that covered objectivism in BioShock and Ayn Rand's own words and footage of her and the comparison in BioShock. That was really, really good. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the guy that did it, so let me actually look it up, because this was a YouTuber that honestly had very few views and very few subscribers, and he almost certainly deserves more. Monty Zander, Monty space Zander, on YouTube. His video is super long, and it is somewhat political, to say the least, when it's comparing BioShock, which in itself, its narrative is somewhat political. It is giving out a political message. Interesting. Why is this not let me attach to it? I don't know why it won't let me attach to that, but whatever. I'm trying to find the exact video, because it's like a BioShock 2. Yeah, it's called BioShock Critique bar, the little line, straight line symbol after the shrug. And it compares basically how BioShock was made and changed as a game in development after the creator read Atlas Shrugged. Although one of the critiques I will make of the critique is it gives a lot of credit to the creator of BioShock, in that he is implying that BioShock is supposed to be a critique of Atlas Shrugged and a parody of Atlas Shrugged, and showing how Atlas Shrugged as a concept is a dumb concept and just really wouldn't work. Which I'm not sure I want to give that full credibility to the creator of BioShock. I can't help but think that if not the creators, some people on that team really still heavily more lean into the idea that objectivism is good, and that the events of BioShock are in some way showing how it could go wrong, but still kind of saying that we should still try the idea of Atlas Shrugged and objectivism. I'm not going to get into the whole awful, super long book of Atlas Shrugged, but it's a terrible story. Ayn Rand is a terrible person. She was traumatized by totalitarianism hiding as socialism, and came to America and very quickly became the mouthpiece for a lot of desire to not pay taxes and desire to make greed good and hyper-capitalism good and sound like a good thing. She was literally preaching a religion, as it were, towards an objective morality, or greed being good. And basically what she says is just nonsense. It's just crazy old lady that argued a lot and was given far too much screen time. And I think in part it was because even at the time a significant amount of people knew her ideas were bad and ridiculing her for ridiculing her ideas. No. But it is also, I think, something that still, unfortunately, is relevant because there is just a lot of people that repeat the same ideas, certainly, and call themselves different things. The names changes, but the ideas stay the same, and those ideas are still propagated. Greed is still propagated as an idea. But I would heavily ask everybody to watch that video and give it it will be very informative and educational. I don't know if I really would suggest people read Atlas Shrugged. You probably should, but you should definitely have a firm foundation of your understanding of economics and your own moral beliefs before you read anything from Ayn Rand. Because if you go into Ayn Rand not already knowing that not just Atlas Shrugged, but basically her entire way of thinking and everything she said should be looked at with a heavy critical eye and disagreed with in almost every scenario, there is a danger that you're going to come out blue-pilled, for lack of a better term, and agreeing with some part of what she says. Which maybe that's an unfair thing to say, is that you should have your mind made up before you even read something, but in some cases it's true. I would say Ayn Rand's writings are probably very close to like Mein Kampf, where I wouldn't recommend people reading Mein Kampf unless you've already understood that Hitler was bad. If you're on the fence or uncertain about Hitler, you probably shouldn't be reading his book. Maybe that is part of a bigger statement that people should just have better critical reading skills or critique skills in general before they do anything. And yeah, I think most people probably would benefit with having more of a critical eye and more shields, for lack of a better term, around the idea of propaganda, which that is what Ayn Rand's writings are, is propaganda. Anyways, video game news. An hour and 10 minutes in. Unity's Create Solutions was a 40% non-game business during Q2 of 2022. Create Solutions is increasingly non-game business, but Unity says it's all parts of its user base contributed to its strong performance in the Q2 of 2022, which I think points out that we are at that point where Unity, even the people who have made games with Unity, are increasingly just moving to Unreal Engine or some other engine, and Unity as a concept is, as an engine, is becoming less and less preferred. And my hope is that something will pop up and replace Unity, because Unity does feel like it is shooting itself in the head fairly quickly here. GameDeveloper.com, these are GameDeveloper.com articles, has an obituary for the Diablo 3 designer Travis Day. Game designer Travis Day, who worked on both World of Warcraft and Diablo 3 at Blizzard Entertainment, passed away. This guy is arguably too young to have passed away. And Diablo 3 as a game is not that old to be a game that is getting to be a game that has people dying on it. Let's see. Let's continuously put things in the graveyard to build up our graveyard collection. That's going to leave me with 2. Well, actually, I guess it doesn't put me in a bad position at all, does it? Problem here is, we're in this Duelist Cup, and I want to focus on playing the Duelist Cup, but well, that sucked. Whatever. So this guy feels like he thinks that's an ultimate defense, but I could have destroyed it just by activating this. Which, let's activate this at this point. And while we're at it, let's disconnect our last guy and destroy this too. We'll just keep on canceling his abilities. Let's see. Travis Day, an Irving area game designer, spent a decade at Blizzard Entertainment, died at the age of 41. News comes from sister Rachel Day, a VFX artist and producer at Bonfire Studios. The cause of death was given. At the very least, this should be the default response for any obituary, is that no cause of death is at this time known, or no cause of death was given. Now, arguably, at age 41, I can't help but wonder if he either did something stupid to hurt himself, or died of COVID. Take your pick. Which, even in that, can often be attributed to stupidity. But yeah, this could have been a suicide at an age like that. It could have been just a bizarre turn of events. Right, well, how do you feel about a 0-0? Alright, if you want to keep screwing around like this, we'll screw around some more. I think what I want to do here is we've gotten a decent amount of victories. We probably want to take a break, and maybe we'll come back and play some. Getting up to Duelist level 12 out of 20. And we have a few more days, but some of this definitely... Also, I should be playing off screen, and really haven't been doing that. Like, as far as the Duelist Cup, we're halfway through activating spells. We are 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through normal summoning. And we've done 18 duels out of 50. And we have like 9 days left. Meanwhile, all the daily quests that we had have been finished. Except for the solo. And then the lifetime, I assume, is just win duels to expand the number of slots. And so we've done 11 victories, we need to get up to 40 eventually. Travis Day's journey in video games industry began in 2005, where he worked first as a customer service rep, which arguably, if anything, points out that he was probably promoted too quickly. That he would have worked as a customer service in 5, and in 17 years he ends up being the system designer for Diablo 3. Like, I mean, that's a decent progress, certainly, for a career. It's not the level of progress a lot of people have in their career, but it also seems odd that he's so young and so successful. And there is also the shadow that GameDeveloper.com themselves makes around Activision Blizzard, and there being a lot of jerk employees there, that you never know if one of these people were the good guys or the bad guys in Activision Blizzard. There's probably a lot more good guys than bad guys, but yeah, controversy and poop smearing affects everybody. In 2018, he left Blizzard Entertainment and joined Phoenix Lab, working on Dauntless. He also spent some time at Lightspeed LA, Tencent's Irving area game development studio. So really it was 13 years that he went from being a customer service representative to being a system designer at Diablo 3. Although, in all fairness, there's plenty of people that end up stuck in these customer service jobs and work well over 13 years and never get a single promotion or anything like that. So you have to applaud him for actually getting out of the customer service job at all. Even a lot of people at Valve, still major hires, end up doing customer service work. A lot of people at Google, major hires, very skilled people, end up doing customer service work. Rachel Day, the sister, said Travis was loved greatly by friends and family and will be deeply missed, which was always a nice quote to say. Day's colleagues left a response to the news shared on Sister. He was described as a pleasure and chat. I don't know what chat means in that case. I almost would think Chad to work with. A friend, or chap. a friend, a colleague, caring individual who shared his life insights with anyone who would listen. So everybody who knew him seemed to like him, which is good because you basically need that in an obituary. And arguably, you should probably have that in any obituary, anyways, unless you can't get a single person to say a nice word. Getting the nice social graces, social platitudes is probably something you should do. Speaking kind of moving on. Speaking of moving on, um, Capcom producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi has departed after 27 years and joined NetEase. He worked on franchises including the Devil May Cry series and Resident Evil series, which it is, I think, worth pointing out that the Devil May Cry series has been fairly stagnant over the past 27 years in large chunks of time, and the Resident Evil series has often been its worst when it was the Japanese teams in charge. So you don't want to just say the guy was bad at his job, but he may very well have been bad at his job. Like, the Resident Evil games that work very well are the ones made by the Western companies. Unfortunately, that's just the truth of it. The Japanese companies oddly try to make Resident Evil more like Western games, where the Western companies try to make them more like Japanese games, or whatever you think a good Resident Evil game should be. And almost certainly all of the nonsense multiplayer extra stuff around Resident Evil is made by the Japanese companies. The fact that you would move anywhere after 27 years shows that there is some big changes happening in the mentality of working in Japan. You're no longer just staying with the same company and being loyal to it for no reason for your entire life. And you do seem to be capable now of actually taking other jobs as an older person. Like, you don't work somewhere for 27 years and not be in your 50s or 60s. So, yeah. And at a certain level, so many people that worked on the Resident Evil series leave the Resident Evil series and then go and do something very different, and that's something that's not that good. We saw that with The Evil Within, really. Also in Tango Gameworks, is that The Evil Within as a series did not capture the minds and hearts of Resident Evil fans. Let's see. A company called Virtuos has opened a Kuala Lumpur development studio as its expansion continues. The studio will offer full game development, engineering, and art production services. I'm not really sure where Kuala Lumpur is. Malaysia, I guess. Not really sure I know where Malaysia is either. I probably should pull out a map. Let's see. Warner Brothers' Hogwarts Legacy will be released in February of 2023. It was previously delayed to 2022. So it's been once again delayed. Krafton has credited PUBG Mobile for its success and its successful H1 2022. So for the first half of 2022. I guess that's what H1 means. Activision Blizzard has unveiled bizarre tactics in fighting an Albany union. Lawyers from Activision Blizzard have released internal Diablo 4 footage and QA tester info in its hearing with the National Labor Review Board. What are the bizarre tactics that they're actually talking about? So, unless the bizarre tactics is just to show video game footage. Labor hearing has lasted all week, during which Activision Blizzard lawyers have resorted to various tactics to make its case to the National Label Review Board. One such tactic saw lawyers revealing footage from the upcoming Diablo 4 game that featured a list of the game's QA testers. I don't feel like that's particularly that bizarre of a tactic to say, here's what we're working on. During the footage, Activision Blizzard allegedly released the cover letter and social media of a specific QA tester, which, showing that to the National Review Board again, may not really be a breach of privacy, because this is happening over Zoom between two parties. I don't think this is happening in open court, as it were. It's probably being arbitrated in a much more like an arbitration meeting. Among Blizzard Albany's employees, that disclosure said by the Washington Post to have upset several of them who've become worried about online harassment. Oh, I see what they're claiming now. Apparently this was more open information, and they did effectively dox an employee, or at least to some extent. Although somebody's cover letter probably should be public. You should write your cover letter in such a way that it should be fairly public, but then your cover letter probably does have your contact info on it also right at the top, so there's definitely some private information there. One Blizzard employee calls it darkly ironic that Activision Blizzard could openly post such information during the hearing. I think darkly ironic is the only thing being quoted there. If an employee wants to be able to update their portfolio or do something that might help them find better employment elsewhere, they have to wait until the game is released, said the employee. But when the company wants to argue against the majority of its employees in a given unit have stated is their best interest, this is a run-on sentence. They won't, and what they want, it's totally fine for them just to share stuff. This is a huge run-on sentence, but it is also a quote. So this is kind of the one example where actually editing this down and breaking the quotes up is helpful. That's one of the things that real news reporters should do, is break up the ramblings of a general person and their run-on sentences into easier to understand, easier to read comments and quotes. Yeah, if only somebody would do something like that for me, then half of what I say probably would make more sense. Previously, Activision Blizzard has been accused of employing union busting tactics such as shuffling Raven's QA team across various company departments, which, when Raven Software's QA workers unionized earlier this year, Activision Blizzard argued that all the Raven's employees should have a say in unionization, and a similar case was made here this time. The publisher's lawyers argued that additional employees should be allowed to vote in the union election, but only ones who specifically work on Diablo games. Quote, "We believe strongly that no employee should be disenfranchised, and that creativity, inspiration, and free exchange of ideas work best when all non-supervisory employees in Albany work on Diablo get to participate in the vote, not just 20 quality assurance testers identified by the union," says Activision Blizzard spokesman Rich George said in a statement in the Washington Post. Game developer has reached out to Activision Blizzard for comment and will update accordingly. That's interesting that they put that sentence there, because that's not really necessary to put that you would hope all reporters would be reaching out for more statements and would update accordingly. Do I think for a second, this is where the network seems to mess up, is when you're just sitting in the menu. Um, do I think for a second, though, that the union is trying to pull something fast and force people into being unionized where they don't want to be unionized? Not really. Like, maybe something like that happens in New York where unions are blatantly and obviously run by the mob, but I don't think there's a need to try to force a specific company to be a union shop if its employees really didn't want to. And inherently, the unions prove a lot of times that people don't know what's best for them, and that's just a sad fact of reality. And so there are a lot of people who will just be anti-union and anti their own best interest always, in the same way that there are people that are anti any government of any sense. And those people, we call them anarchists and pay them no mind uh, when they're talking about government governance and government having people supposedly represent them in government forms. Well, effectively, there are employment anarchists who will always be anti-union because there's been just millions, if not billions and trillions of dollars put out there to propagate anti-union sentiment, much of which is inaccurate and just straight up lies in the minds of particularly United States citizens. That is why there is so much of a large difference between the idea of unions in the US compared to any other major country. Unions are just a thing that exists in Japan, that so much that you don't even really have to talk about them. Like, I've never seen a single report or statement as far as the unions in Japan really having to go on strike that much, or people fighting being unionized in Japan. It's just the default in many countries, not just Japan. So I have to assume that their argument that they want more than just the 20 people who voted to become a union, and they want more people to vote, is probably just a delay tactic, because if they did get more real employees in there, almost certainly the vote would still go the same direction, unless Activision Blizzard is actively trying to hire people who will vote against the union, effectively hiring scabs even before there's a strike, or they are trying to reorganize the offices in such a way so that the people who would be allowed to vote are people they know would vote against the union, to disenfranchise all the people who would vote for it. Regardless, though, I think we're going to see them probably succeed at unionizing, and hopefully that will be the very beginnings of a slow path towards a better video game companies in general. That all video game companies really need to be more unionized. In particular, it's a slightly different thing, certainly, for creatives and highly skilled people to need to be unionized, but actors are unionized, and they're creatives and highly skilled people. There's very few of them there in the career. Usually unions are more about generic labor, people working in factories, people working in customer service fields where basically anybody can do the job. But it kind of works for everybody. But yeah, you can see there is a timeout here, but it seems to only happen on the main menu. Moving on, we need to really burn through the news, and I don't think we'll get back to a game. And Alone in the Dark returns with a remake. A Alone in the Dark remake has been announced. A Alone in the Dark game hasn't come out in 7 years. Although, in all honesty, the Alone in the Dark game that most recently came out was total garbage and people forgot about it. And the game, The Alone in the Dark, before that was total garbage and an attempt at a reboot, and people forgot about that also. There was the one before the most recent one was the one that was set mostly in New York City. So really they are very, very late to the party. There should have been a good Alone in the Dark reboot not 7 years ago, probably closer to 14 years ago. Just because the name works very well. Let's see, we have a trailer here of a being blurred out, and immediately you see something that doesn't quite feel like Alone in the Dark. This little girl hanging all of her dolls from the roof, and now potentially hanging herself. This is part of a THQ Nordic presentation, and THQ Nordic Embracer Group in particular has a problem in that they've acquired a bunch of games, game companies, and they said they had, I think it was in the high 20s as far as the number of game companies that are games in development, and they've failed in the past 4 or 5 years to actually start to announce new games, or even show that these companies they've acquired were actually working on anything. Looking at that trailer, that doesn't feel like quite the right time frame for Alone in the Dark. That being said, I haven't played any of the Alone in the Dark games, so I don't know if there really is a great narrative or story you can redo with that. I think the first game is you go to a creepy house and you have to try to survive a creepy house. But so maybe that's this general idea. It seems like you're going to potentially be playing as multiple characters and fighting big monsters, but of no real specific description. The first Alone in the Dark was made in 1992 from Info Games, and made 2 sequels to the original series, 2 live action films that had really nothing to do with it, and then a 2015 Alone in the Dark Illumination. So they're skipping over the other Alone in the Dark series here in the description. It was originally owned by Atari, and Atari is dead as a company. So it's a horror game with Alone in the Dark in the title, set kind of in the 1920s, which that's fine. Maybe horror game called Alone in the Dark is all that's really necessary. Of course, if you are playing as multiple characters, and you have a trailer here showing multiple people, are you alone in the dark? Or have they once again failed to understand the concept of, if you call something Alone in the Dark, you have to be alone and you have to be in the dark, because Alone in the Dark Illumination wasn't in the dark. Not that you want a game that's just full dark screenshot syndrome either. That would still be a nightmare. You actually want to be able to see the game. Maybe you mostly play as just the guy, which then begs the question as to why do you start with a little girl and end with a woman, unless it's supposed to be the case that this little girl at the beginning is this woman at the end. It'll probably be a long time before we have anything to really show or say around this. I don't know why we have a visual novel here that doesn't support English on the follow list. So we'll get rid of that. And then the ramp as a skating game on the follow list. Maybe this is the idea in particular that you need to go with, is to have a more simplistic skating game instead of trying to go with a hyper realistic skating game with giant open worlds. The illumination of the open world elements and having small levels might be a good idea. And we're doing a little bit of follow list cleanup here at the moment. Horror game called The Radio Station, rated very positively. Says it's a psychological Japanese horror. We'll put that on the wish list. This is because things are out of order. Quiet Apocalypse is mixed, so we can remove that from the follow list. I updated the is this something that you can play single player? Yes, it is. So I can go to the wish list, obviously, the quarry. I updated the page it goes to as far as looking at new games. So now we are specifically excluding Japanese language and Russian only language. No. We're specifically excluding Chinese language and Russian only language games. So if the game is only Chinese or if the game is only Russian, it's not showing up in the follow list or in the list that I'm searching for new games that came out. That is the only games I'm excluding. Any other language that does not include English as one of the options will be shown. Now, arguably, I might get tired of that fairly quickly and go back to a smaller list. If all of a sudden we start to see a lot of Portuguese, Brazilian language, there's Portuguese, Spanish speaking language games, that might get eliminated. We have a decent number of games on the fall list that are not good, which, yeah, it's not super surprising either. So it's a Witness clone. Unfortunately, it's not well reviewed, so we'll get rid of it. And so this should put us back on the path. The PlayStation site here hints that PC ports may need a PlayStation Network account in the future. Some Xbox Game Studio titles on Steam already require an Xbox Live account. Which I'd like to see a list of the games that are on Steam that actually require an Xbox Live account. I have yet to run into let's see. It's also apparently currently not possible to transfer save data from the PS4 to PS5 versions to PC. See, Minecraft Dungeons, Ori and the Will of Wisps, and Psychonauts 2 don't need players to create Xbox Live accounts. Other notable Game Studios titles do, like Horizon 5, Sea of Thieves, Halo Master Chief Collection, as Dusk Falls. And yeah, I haven't played any of these games, so I haven't run into that. But if you do, on Xbox Live's version, it comes with shared achievements and shared save progress. So you're getting a fairly good reward for making a free Xbox Live account. And I think that is something you have to really point out here, is that both the Xbox Live account has a free level, as is the truth with the PlayStation Network accounts. You can have a bronze version or a free level of both of those accounts for the low price and cost of just giving your email address or a email address away. Seems like my ad blocker here has decided to screw up today on all of these pages. The new Kirby game will be released next week, Nintendo confirms, which we are far too early to have yet another Kirby game come out. This is Kirby's Dream Buffet. It's a side game. And then we have the sponsored content here, which that's what this little bookmark means when it's filtered out to this, that this is sponsored content, which is why we keep seeing the same Tower Fantasy advertisement. Sega has confirmed 11 more Mega Drive 2 Mini 2 games. Some will likely be included in the Western version of the mini console. Let's see, do we have a full list here? Echo the Dolphin CD, Game Ground, Phantasy Star 2, Populous, Robo, Duelist, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 3, Shin Megami Tensei Mega CD, which shows how long that series has been going on. Sorcerin, Tinka Fuba, Iyutachi no Haukou, Togi Ou King Colossus, and Viewpoint. And of those, that Echo the Dolphin CD is the only game that even sounds slightly familiar, other than Shin Megami Tensei. It's a decent amount of games, though. So even when you're talking like the Sega Mega Drive and Sega CD lineup, those games weren't taking a ridiculous amount of space. Let's see. FIFA 23 Ultimate will introduce new foot moments and refresh chemistry, according to VideoGamesChronicles.com. That's what we're reading. Jeff Keighley says to expect cool surprises and things you wouldn't expect at Gamescom. Gameplay clips, trailers, and announcements promised for opening night. I suspect Gamescom is going to be more important now, as E3 is effectively dead, and the Summer of Games did seem to have a lot of late cancellations of announcements, or just not get all the announcements it possibly could have had. And we probably are just going to start to see more announcements spread out more often. Nightingale Early Access is delayed until 2023 to upgrade to the Unreal Engine 5. I don't even recognize this game Nightingale, though. Oh, it's this creepy game with the puppets. If that's the case, then why are they showing me like survival mechanics? Yeah, I don't remember which game this was. It's a survival game, I think, where you go to different worlds and then you try to get these cards that let you go to different worlds. So it's almost like a Myst game if you were going to put survival and action combat into Myst, which isn't a terrible thought. But I also think it was potentially an MMO. Man, these ads are really wrecking my visuals here. The classic Japanese developer Sunsoft is holding a virtual event next week. I imagine they aren't going to be announcing anything too interesting. They might have something to do with Marvel's Midnight Suns, but that game got delayed, so I'm not expecting anything big from that. New Modern Warfare 2 video shows the Farm 18 map, so a new map or an old map being redone. Unity has also won a contract with the U.S. Government of Defense, Department of Defense, I assume. Employees have previously spoken out against Unity's government work. They don't like that Unity's working with the government. At a certain point, maybe this is what Riccatello is doing with Unity, is that he's selling or prostituting the company with no abandon to just increase its valuation to get a merger to happen between either AppLovin or the other company that they were trying to merge with. Like when you're talking, hey, we got this defense contract, hey, we've got a merger happening. These are the signs of somebody who's playing with the stock market price and not really caring about what the actual company does. On the other hand, you can be fairly generous and say, well, if it wasn't going to be Unity that won the government defense contract, it would have been probably Unreal Engine. So, like, one way or the other, the government is going to give their contracts out to somebody to do whatever they're trying to do. I don't know if they're using Unity to make models of, say, terrorists' houses that they want to blow up, or if they are making fake news with the Unity engine and just whole stock creating people and locations and events, or maybe it's just training. It could be anything and everything. They could just be using Unity to make an app for some reason. Like, Unity wouldn't be a terrible engine to think about using if you just needed an app for security reasons to log into the computers or to get through the doors of buildings. Let's see, the Video Games Chronicle article here. The new Alone in the Dark game has leaked ahead of its reveal. The Belgian shop listing was backed with leaked screenshots. That being said, this screenshot doesn't really look like that trailer. So, if this is supposed to be part of the new Alone in the Dark series, this probably is just concept art. It doesn't really feel like this would be what the cover looked like. And at a certain point, it kind of doesn't matter if there's just a slight leak around the screenshot or concept art of a game that's not going to be out for probably a year or two anyways. Sega claims that Sonic Frontiers won't be delayed. Good for it. Probably should be. Multiversus Season 1 new release date has been confirmed. Morty will arrive a week after the season starts. Season 1 starts August 15th. We may have already talked about that. We already talked about the veteran Resident Evil producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi leaving Capcom for NetEase. He was the producer on Resident Evil 4, so arguably he was actually the good producer of the Japanese games, Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry 4, and Killer 7. Oddly though, the Resident Evil 7 remake is still in development, so it seems weird that he would be out at this point. There was also already some concern about Resident Evil 4 just being somewhat censored and trying to appeal to the woke mob, or trying not to just have controversy, to the point where they have already censored the VR version of Resident Evil 4, and they were going to do more changes in the remake of Resident Evil 4, and maybe that's the reason he left, or maybe he's just tired or got a better offer, who knows. There is definitely that concern that the Resident Evil 4 remake will change the story so drastically that it stops feeling like it's actually Resident Evil 4. which is ironic because you can incredibly drastically improve the gameplay and the level layouts and the puzzles, and very few people will probably complain one bit about that. But if Leon doesn't feel like Leon, and if the president's daughter is not there at all in the story, or if she all of a sudden becomes a Mary Sue instead of being the person you're there to save, then that would feel weird. You could maybe get rid of some of the corniness in Resident Evil 4, and most people wouldn't care about that, but if it's just corniness gets replaced with wokeness, that's going to be annoying, certainly. Speaking of which, there is also a story worth mentioning, that the Japanese on Twitter, at least a small number of Japanese people, are complaining about the fact that they cannot tell the difference between the males and the females in Pokemon Violet and Scarlet, because Pokemon Violet and Scarlet has mostly done away with the females wearing skirts. Both the boys and girls effectively wearing shorts, and a lot of characters are either prepubescent, so the girls don't have really big boobs, or they're wearing puffy shirts. And so there have been, I've seen several examples of characters, not just the kid characters, but adult characters that are getting labeled in the description as male, and they go, male, that looks like female, or they're getting labeled as female, and they go, that looks like a male, and they just can't tell, because the Japanese in particular 100% have been trained in their society and their way of growing up to know if you're wearing a skirt or a dress, you are female. If you are not, you are male. It is fairly gender specific as far as how the dress goes in Japan, and that's not just out of school uniforms. It definitely is reinforced from school uniforms and office uniforms, but even in day-to-day life, Japanese women and girls don't particularly wear pants or shorts ever after a certain age, and they probably wear shorts when they're very, very young little girls, but after a certain age they wear skirts, and they wear skirts every single day of their life for the rest of until they die. And men wear shorts when they're younger, and then slacks for the most part after that point. So yeah, they've never really developed the need to try and figure out gender through other characteristics, and it's always been very easy for Japanese just to look at the clothing. On top of that, you're talking about the Pokemon series, which is an anime inspired animation style where the anime boys look like girls and the girls look like girls. So very rarely do you have a case where there's a character that is drawn super masculine, and even if they are drawn super masculine, it still doesn't come off as that masculine in that animation style. So what does that all boil down to, as far as an opinion that I have, is that Pokemon, the Pokemon Company, have, either because of the setting of it being more of a Spanish-like country, decided to do something different and didn't think it all the way through, or to appease people who have complained in the past, they have drawn, either purposely or accidentally, a lot of characters androgynously, and that has caused pushback from the other side. Particularly for the Pokemon series, I don't think there was a lot of complaints about characters being drawn particularly masculine or particularly feminine, other than the fact that, yes, the past few Pokemon games, and pretty much every Pokemon game, has had a lot of lewd exaggerations of characters, particularly female characters that have come out. So maybe they were trying to fight that and went too far in the other direction. Because yeah, there definitely were characters that became fan favorites, and then a lot of nude images, Rule 34 fan art was made. But you would never be able to kill that kind of fan art no matter what, even if you did draw the characters androgynous. All you would do is kill people being interested in them. So that would be a dumb move anyways. The bigger complaint around the Pokemon games in particular was one of the previous Pokemon games had more of a Gauru style anime girl, which I believe it's Gauru is the word. These are Japanese girls that are kind of like LA Valley Club Hollywood type girls, kind of airhead characters is the best equivalent, and they do bronze skin tanning, painted on skin tans, which makes them look a little bit darker skinned than your average pale Japanese girl. And there was complaints that was effectively blackface or black toning up your skin, which I can't really agree with that. Like, until we get to a point where people agree that tanning or spray-on tanning is not acceptable at all, it is fairly acceptable to darken your skin to a certain level and not consider that cultural appropriation by any means. And the Garu culture, it really has nothing to do at all with Africans or African Americans, so they really aren't appropriating or having any real thought at all about Africans when they're tanning up or putting on spray tans. And Pokemon has been a community that has been particularly bad about people trying to claim that characters are transgendered or in some other way LGBTQ+, and there's been no confirmation or really no desire at all to potentially confirm any of that baseless speculation. Let's open 10 packs here. Hey, we got another Ultra Rare. But yeah, I think part of the problem certainly is that Pokemon is a very popular series with a lot of different people who are going to talk about it on Twitter, even as Twitter is kind of increasingly irrelevant as a source of feedback, and yet the Japanese are still afraid of that feedback when they really, particularly the Pokemon company, should insulate themselves from that kind of feedback and say, hey, we're just are not taking that kind of feedback. We're not seeking out that kind of feedback. We know what we want to do with the Pokemon series, and we're going to do it. Which at a certain level, if the artists truly do want to just draw all the characters as androgynous and have them all just in shorts, that's fine. I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why they're actually in shorts, or the kids are, is because they have only like one level of character model and one level of clipping, and skirts are probably a lot harder to draw as far as, or to animate as fabric materials than shorts, which can be more rigid and won't float around. So yeah, it also might just be an artistic decision for that area, and we will see that. I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why the kids are all in shorts is because they're introducing these Pokemon that are also motorcycles, and riding on a motorcycle on a skirt is probably harder to animate than riding on a motorcycle in shorts. So that very possibly is the only logic behind it at all, is that they wanted the cool motorcycles to look cool. And we may see that most, if not all, characters in the game do ride motorcycles at one point or the other. Moving on, we still have plenty of news 2 hours in. Today, Capcom will stream two presentations at the Tokyo Game Show. One is solely focused on Street Fighter 6. So, yeah, Tokyo Game Show at least promising some news, whereas in previous years it felt like it really wasn't that big of a deal, particularly during the pandemics. Barely happening or barely having anything new to be announced. Zavi has launched a new Pokemon range, including trading card advent calendars. I don't know Zavi as a company though, but the advent calendars with trading cards in it might be a hot idea, certainly. Because I could see opening up a pack every single day for the days of Advent being kind of a cool idea. But honestly, I don't know if a single pack is enough packs to open in any trading card game. Halloween countdown calendar is also on sale. Yeah, that might be an interesting thing. It might also be incredibly overpriced for chances for some very bad or irrelevant Pokemon cards. I can't help but assume that a lot of the Pokemon card bundles, if not pretty much all Pokemon trading cards in general, are fairly worthless and fairly overpriced, even compared to things like Magic the Gathering. Hogwarts Legacy has been delayed to February. Nintendo Switch launch is now unknown. They are not getting that game out fast enough, considering the merger and everything else getting cancelled. Alright, and then we have some Gamatsu articles. We'll try and burn through them, or at least some of them. The Gotham Knights Red Hood trailer is available. The Splatoon 3 Direct, new details, footage, and screenshots, if you want to check that out. I guess I want to see if there's anything really too visually interesting here. This computer terminal seems like that might be a new thing. Squid Kids still look like Squid Kids. There was, I think, a slight danger of the Squid Kids aging up and getting older to the point where you're at like Splatoon 5 or 6 and then they are adults and you're introducing a whole new generation of Squid characters. It might be that these characters here might be presenters and commentators and not actually characters you can play as. You may not be playing against the same bad guys that you were in the single player campaign of Splatoon 2, which that would be alright too. You might be in a different region also. The Splatoon world is a flooded future of the Mario Brothers universe, or at least that's what's implied, where the bloopers from Super Mario Brothers 1 evolve into the Squid Kids. So it wouldn't be super crazy if they went from one floating pavilion to another floating pavilion, and that there are just these different islands throughout the flooded world. But for a flooded world game, they do seem to actually not go in the ocean. But yeah, looks cool enough. The thing that certainly concerns me, there's a ton of screenshots here. I've never seen the gallery bar this long. Uh, my concern is Splatoon 1, I think, may have been on the Wii U or Wii, and so it may be fairly unplayable for me having just a Switch. Splatoon 2 may very well have not enough single player content to justify actually playing or buying the game. And Splatoon 3 runs into that same problem because it's always been a multiplayer first experience. You're seeing some different animations on attacks, which probably indicate that there are some new weapons. And it is going to be 3-on-3 battles instead of 2 versus 2 battles. But it doesn't feel like there is a major gimmick change other than 3 versus 3 instead of 2 versus 2. Still feels like it's mostly spray painting, paintballing. Yeah. This is Shiver. This is Fry. And the other character was named Big Guy. And it seems like they'll sell some amiibos too. This is Big Guy. So, moderately hypeable if you want to get hyped around Splatoon 3. I don't see any real reason why you couldn't get hyped around that. Saints Row has a reboot gameplay overview trailer if you want to check that out. I think I probably have already seen this, but if I haven't, I'm not sure I particularly even care. Seems like I'm seeing a lot of cutscenes being shown in between some actual gameplay being shown. Driving cars, riding on top of cars, shooting cars, talking to people, taking missions. Fighting people. Being set in the desert, I'm surprised there's a boat. Things, customizing cars. Yeah, being set in the desert though, I suspect there's just going to be a lot of driving around. More than you probably want in a Saints Row game. Because it just doesn't feel like in this like New Mexican city, it's going to be this giant city like LA or New York where you're going to have a building around every corner. A side-scrolling Souls-like Metroidvania called Biomorph has been announced for Switch and PC. Let's see here. Not really showing too much there. Just a teaser trailer. Running sequence, action. Right, so you're kind of in a cave, you're kind of fighting things. And that really is just a tease. It might be interesting, it might not be. Who's to say? A 2.5D action platformer, The Devil Within Satgat, has been announced for everything except for the Stadia. Due out in 2023. Might be something to that. It's kind of surprising we've got so many announcements when I don't feel like Gamescom happened yet, but maybe it did. A shoot 'em up called Shino Ruby has been announced for everything except for PC and Stadia, because it's already in early access on PC. Let's see what this one looks like. And unfortunately, this is just another situation where I'm just always behind and always too busy to casually just watch a trailer and check it out. It's a shoot 'em up game, so I could have dismissed it just by knowing it was a shoot 'em up. It doesn't look terrible as a shoot 'em up idea, but I'm not sure it actually would play that well. PlayStation Plus game catalog games for August 2022 have been announced. I think we've talked about that multiple times already. Moonscars launches on September 27th for everything except Stadia. For consoles and PC, that's what I really should say. Say 2D action playable, available with Xbox Game Pass. Interestingly, I think this is the first time I've heard about this game. I almost certainly would recognize and remember a game that has this dark visuals to it. So kind of like a Castlevania, Metroidvania game. That definitely catches my eye with that aesthetic, for sure. I guess that's being published by Humble Games, which I guess they're still doing something. Star Ocean: The Divine Forces has character trailers for Albert Bergholm and Elena. She definitely feels more sci-fi than he does. But I don't know if that's particularly out of character for the Star Ocean series. The Forest of Drizzling Rain remake launches this fall worldwide, which I can't help but assume that this is some kind of like RPG Maker or visual novel. Kind of feels like it's almost an RPG Maker game, but not quite. Like you have this that looks like RPG Maker, but then that really doesn't, and that really doesn't. And it feels more like it is just going to maybe be its own kind of adventure game. The thing here, though, is this probably is one of those games that says, oh, it's getting a remake, but it was originally made 2 or 3 years ago, and they're just trying to really re-release the game and get more eyes behind it. Because this is definitely not a game I recognize or have ever heard of, and it doesn't visually look that good. And if this is what the game is supposed to look like in its remake format, it must look absolutely awful in its original format. This would be helpful if they told me specifically when it originally came out. It says, his debut title, The Forest of Drizzling Rage, drew lots of attention when it was first made available on the internet in October of 2013. It continued to grow in popularity as translations appeared by volunteers. So if anything, the remake is really just making official translations released. 2013, and then a remake coming out in 2022. It's not that bad, really. You're talking 9 years later. But this is the kind of game that is at such a small scope and scale that it doesn't probably justify ever needing a remake. A game called Thymesia, the cloud version, has been announced for Switch, so I have to assume that this is yet another example of a game that really just could not be run on the Switch alone. Kirby's Dream Buffet launches August 17th. We already talked about that. And there might be some different screenshots and a video here if you wanted to check it out. Earth Defense Force 6 has its 6th trailer, if you want to check that out. Sunsoft has its digital event set for August 18th. So Adesco has acquired the Spanish developer Super Lumion. Which of those companies I recognize at all. Metal Slug Tactics has been delayed to 2023. Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters is coming to the West in early 2023 for the PS4, PS5, and PC. Oddly, not the Switch, and not surprisingly that it's not coming to the Xbox, because I don't think the Neptunia series has ever really tried to be on the Xbox. That being said, I believe Sisters vs. Sisters was one of the poorer quality Neptunia games out there, and arguably there is a decent too high of a number of bad quality Neptunia games out there that are just kind of mediocre RPG games that you would just have to grind through them if you wanted to. Let's start going through some of the games on Steam. The Appraiser here doesn't look like anything. I'm probably going to have to be fairly quick through all these. I'll give this a follow just to see if maybe there's something good there. Maybe there's comedy in this codename Nemesis, but I suspect it'll never have relevancy. This is a no. Now remember, I'm including any game now that includes any language except for exclusive Chinese and Russian. Here we have a Digipen game that's coming soon, which I don't know why a game needs to be listed coming soon, particularly if it's coming out the next day. Like there really should be a limit on that. It seems like a waste of time. Speed the card game looks like a mobile port, so know that. Feral Instincts visual novel. What I need to also keep an eye out for is to see if there's a warning here that says English not supported on some of these games. No, because if we start to see a bunch of games that say English not supported, then that's going to be a problem. But I suspect we won't. Almost all games on Steam do support English. It's a very small percentage that don't. Of course, including new games is not going to, including more games is not going to speed up this process by any means. This almost certainly is not going to be good, but I will put it on the follow list. We're also still looking for YouTube Shorts. I need to schedule more daily PC videos. These are, this looks like it might be interesting as a point and click. The YouTube Shorts are working extremely well, getting lots and lots of views. I actually saw my YouTube short, as far as daily PC game shorts, showing up in my own short recommendation. Is it leading to a massive increase of subscriptions or views on my channel? Views? Possibly. Subscriptions? Not really. But I have gotten 2 or 3 new subscriptions in the past week or so. So I'd like to see that trend increase. It would I'd like to see it snowball. It really would need to snowball to getting 200 or 300 subscriptions in a week's time or a month's time. And honestly, I guess if I could go the next 5 months and get 100 new subscriptions in the next 5 months, then I probably would get to the 1,000 point there. But you also kind of want to get above that buffer so you don't fall below 1,000 subscriptions and then get demonetized again. So yeah, if I get to 1,000 subscriptions and the watch time right and I could actually start running ads again, I wouldn't want to stop at that point. I would like to get to 5, maybe even 10,000 subscribers. I don't need 50,000 subscribers. I don't need 500,000 or 1 million or anything like that, but it would be nice, certainly, to have a buffer and to be able to actually make some actual money off of my effort too. So here's an example of an English language not supported Japanese only visual novel. Looks like it is a guy on guy yaoi visual novel, if I was to guess. Or there's no romance in it at all, but I'm fairly certain there is. which that certainly is an example of something that could recontextualize my understanding of the marketplace. If all of a sudden I start to see that there is actually a lot of guy on guy gay visual novels that are Japanese only, or girl on girl gay visual novels that are like Yuri. Yuri is girl on girl. But if I start to see a lot of them and they're on Steam, but they're Japanese only, then that just tells me that they're not getting translated by the creators, and it's not Valve's fault that they're not hiding the games. I've just been searching well. However, I will point out that this game is not an adult game. We haven't seen an adult game at all today. It doesn't have any mature content. So if there is originally some mature content for this game, it's hidden behind some patch that you'd have to go find, which has still been the case, certainly, for a lot of games that come out on Steam or elsewhere, is that there are these adult patches that are either free DLC on Steam or hidden away on some site that you have to learn about, effectively getting very close to a mod. And if you're just talking about adult mods, lots of games have adult mods for them, either made by fans or made by the original creators, and so that feels less official. This doesn't look animated well enough, and personally I would like to see the facade and the soft percentage of censorship go away, where you're just trying to make 90% of people who are too lazy to find the mod or too lazy to find the adult patch not do it, and you don't care about the 10% of people who actually do go and find the adult patches or the mods, because that's still censorship. If CNN or Fox News, take your pick, was only available to 10% of the population, or you had to put in a code that you had to look up online every time you wanted to watch CNN or Fox News, well, 90% of people probably would be deterred from regularly watching those news sources. That would still be putting your thumbs on the scale and a form of soft censorship. Censorship is not doesn't have to be 100% banning outright of content. Well, we can see here that the Spider-Man Remastered is overwhelmingly positive, so that's good news. Does this one require a PlayStation account? No, it doesn't seem like it. Does it play on the Steam Deck? Yep. So, obviously this is going to be a YouTube short. Something I probably should rush to put out earlier, but I probably won't. Space trailer. Space Tail. Seems like you turn into different animals to platform. Might be something to that. Now this is a free game. Should I do a spotlight for a free game? Probably. Like, there's probably should. Soko Chess. Doesn't look like anything. Putinist Slayer. Looks like it's a joke game. Project Zombie Survivors. If the name wasn't so low effort, and if it didn't have a dragon here, I might have actually considered it. And there we go. Hot Tentacle Shooter, which is tagged hentai anime. What's the center of it is a very bad looking shoot 'em up game, and it seems like on the left side you have a character that's in different outfits that maybe is your character, and on the right side is a different character that is getting covered up by tentacles, and I guess maybe as you play the game, the tentacles maybe get removed to show lewd images. Although I don't know if there actually are any nude images. I guess it claims to have nudity in it, but it definitely does not feel. I can show everything here because this is YouTube family friendly, isn't it? Yeah, pretty awful shoot 'em up game. Tentacles over an image, and then I assume your character maybe takes damage and her clothes change. But yeah, it's not really the worst thought for a game to do something with the side art, particularly on shoot 'em ups, but it's not really implemented and visually polished enough. Let's move on. Here we've got a jigsaw puzzle game of no interest. Paper Flight Super Speed Dash. Is there something here I'm interested? No, I think this can be a no also. I need to stop using the phrase interest because the way I pronounce it sounds funny in my ears, and what's funny is half of the things I say that sound perfectly fine to my ears actually sound pretty awful when I go back and listen to the recordings, and in general I sound pretty awful to my own ears. But then I also use phrases that, for as much as I use them, I seem to still mispronounce them pretty horribly. But yeah, I'm definitely not great at speaking by my own opinion. But I couldn't imagine me trying to type or script anything or prompt someone else to speak for me. That would be the only way it would really work. I'm going to give this a follow and see if maybe this is interesting. Is that I would have to be talking into a microphone into someone else's ear, and then that person would have to understand and comprehend what I'm saying fairly all the time, almost all the time, and then be able to recontextualize it and re-speak it at a very high rate. And that's unlikely to ever happen, so I might as well just hope for brain-to-brain communication to be invented at some point. But even at that, if they did invent some way you could telepathically communicate with people, I may find myself poor at that form of communication also. Fighter X Fighter here is not quite polished enough. Arcade waifu here. Here you got some anime girls. They are leaning more to the moe style, it being a little bit shorter, a little bit younger looking. But I don't know if this game actually has any adult content in it. Sexual content. All characters are 18 years or older. It's sad that this might be the closest thing we've seen so far towards a more anime style game in a long time. This is just a puzzle game. At a certain point, I also kind of wonder though if maybe the moe animation style for specifically adult visual novels has lost its interest, because I haven't seen any announced by Japanese companies either. This Overtop is coming soon, so we'll wait till it actually comes out. Otherwise that looked interesting. And then does this one have adult content, suggestive themes, and costumes? Anime Trail Girlish Square. Yeah. we're still seeing a few of the Moe style games out there. And this is a dating sim. But it definitely feels like it's a censored version of it. Uniquely, this also feels like this was an animator who had a love for fairly large breasts, because every character does seem to be in that same body type, and fairly thick thighs and buttocks also being highlighted in this screenshot. So there definitely seems to be a type. Guess you put that on the fall list just because I like to see how well that's received. Whereas here we have a Western, and I don't know what you'd call this other than a Western visual novel, with just absolute terrible pencil drawings, marker drawings being shown. This is not horrible, but this also, I suspect, might have been traced as an image, and certainly the background seems weird. This is awful too, and the whole premise is kind of dumb. What if George Washington was a girl? Is a terrible title, where you could certainly do that story, George Washington being female, but you probably would want all the founding fathers to turn into founding mothers, as it were, not just George Washington. This is more of a title that you would have randomly created just through silliness or through a random word generator. Yeah, there's nothing there that looks appealing. Between Two Worlds is another one of these Western adult games with nudity and pornography in the screenshots, using the using the realistic 3D model animation style of characters. Here we can show it off. Realistic 3D model of hyper realistic. This game is an adult only section game, and it's actually the first adult only section game I've seen. There is still, it feels like, a big divide between Western game developers putting their games in the adult only section and Eastern developers. Of course, this next game that I looked at, Yandere Goddess, a Snatch Made in Heaven, Snatch being a kind of insulting term for female genitalia, is in the adult section too, and it is much more of a flat 2D animation style. I will say the characters are stretched out a little bit taller and lengthier than your average Moe art style, so I would put it closer towards a early 2010s, early 2000s animation style if I was to randomly put a number on it. But this is a full Japanese voiced game that is in the adult section and does have mature content warnings to it. It too is going under that same pattern too, where the screenshots are showing actual nudity, actual pornography on the screenshots, which I still disagree with that, regardless of what type of game it is. I don't think Steam should go that direction, but I could also be persuaded into believing that that is the default, because on other storefronts that's what happens, is that the screenshots are explicit in other storefronts, and so it's a little burdensome to have to censor your screenshots specifically for Steam. But I would probably say too bad. It's a better to censor the screenshots. The Secret of Rockopolis is a VR game of something that doesn't look too interesting. It's a point and click game in VR, and that's why his arms are all stretchy, so he can grab objects and look at them. You know, that's not a terrible thought. It's also already on the fall list. Are we doing fall list cleanup now? Yep. I think we may be. This seam sealed ampule. Right, this came out in 2021. It's 81% positive. It follows the rules. So I'll put this on the wish list, but in all honesty, I'm not particularly visually impressed by this game. I don't think I'd really buy it, but maybe you could get it fairly cheap. It's been down to $13.99, and even at that, I don't think I'd probably buy it at that price. Then we have a mixed reviewed game called The Scream, which is a VR visual experience, so we can take that off. I guess I just don't have any other GameDeveloper.com articles. Duel Game of Ur 3D, not really gaining relevancy here. Based on the oldest board game we've figured out. There's a YouTube video around it showing how they think it was played. But the Room VR is overwhelmingly positive, but it's a VR game only. And it kind of messes up the whole idea of the Room series to know that there's this VR game that is also part of the series, but many people won't be able to actually play that game in the series. The Rig, a Star Map to Murder. Screenshots don't want to load. Yeah, a low timeout probably would cause the screenshots not to load also. Yeah, that looks good enough. But it's a VR game too. The Rift Breaker. It's a tower defense game. Do I want to play a tower defense game? You know what? I'm going to skip it, and I'm going to try and rush and finish the stream because I decided to eat a lot of food and then start streaming, and I need to rush to the bathroom. The responsible thing would be to just pause the recording and do that, but whatever. Revolt here. I'll give some more time to just not make any decisions unless the decision is to put it on the wish list. I think this could leave the follow list though. That looks like garbage. And then the Research Age. Say no to that. Okay. And then we have a few more Gamatsu articles. We don't need to cover the Mega Drive Mini 2 games again. Soccer RPG Soccer Story has been announced for everything including Stadia. Which, okay. Might be something to that. Looks slightly interesting. Islet launches August 24th for Xbox One, Switch, and PC. A turn-based RPG adventure game. A turn-based RPG called Avatar Generations for iOS and Android is going to soft launch in August, which arguably Avatar really ruined their franchise by just kind of nicely wrapping everything up after Avatar and the sequel to Avatar. I don't think you can really make any games or anything now that people would care about. I think people are done and just satisfied with it, which is the best way to end a series, frankly, compared to people just hanging on the series that ended kind of badly, like Harry Potter, or that never ended at all, like the Song and Fire of Ice books. Nightingale's early access has been delayed to the first half of 2023. We already talked about that. Hiroyuki Kobayashi leaving Capcom. We already talked about it. He effectively left as a producer level to become a producer at NetEase. So it's not like he got a real promotion there, although maybe he'll get more authority as a producer at NetEase. Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kisekai 2 Crimson Sun has a long trailer and screenshots if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Capcom announces a partial Tokyo Game Show 2022 lineup, which will include Street Fighter 6, Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection, and more. Monster Hunter Soul Break, or Sunbreak. RPG Maker Unite is detailed default characters with full body portraits, so be prepared to start to see a lot of characters that look somewhat similar to this or exactly like this in RPG Maker games. Like, it's not like these characters look terrible by any means, but the second you see a character once, it is going to inevitably be the character that belongs in that one game, not a character that belongs in multiple games. And while you can see the RPG Maker art style is going for longer, more realistic heights of characters, they're seemingly just kind of shrinking the height by a couple feet for the kids, or less than 1 foot for slightly younger teenage characters. So it doesn't kind of feel like it matches. When you look at this fairy, you can see how that really feels like the fairy is way bigger than it should be. And you're seeing a lot of people that are frankly at the wrong height, if these are the same heights and they aren't just randomly zooming in. And they're not going to by default emphasize too many characters showing a lot of skin, but I will say, hey, there are some characters here at least willing to show some skin. Not a lot of them, but at least a collection. And at a certain point, it feels like a game like RPG Maker or an assistive programming technology like RPG Maker Unite should do something to make sure that this doesn't just get copy and pasted into low effort games. Maybe you make the color palettes awful intentionally, but then that doesn't sell it very well. Maybe you put a logo in front of each of the characters. Maybe you put some programming in your software to say, no, you can't use the default color palette, you need to change the color palette and match things differently. If theoretically you programmed each character to have 3 to 8 different colors that were the color palette for that character, and then overall you could change a thematic alliance so that all the characters on one side of a battle were dressed in blue and all the others were dressed in red, that would be helpful. Certainly, if you could say all these people are going to be on this team and they're all going to be dressed in red, and then all of a sudden that just by default changes each thing that should be red to red and each thing that should be blue to blue. But while I'm sure you could do that by hand, I don't know if RPG Maker Unite would have something like that. It probably doesn't. And as a gamer, just more RPG Maker games doesn't sound good. Even if they do look better, inherently, even if you got the games looking great and they were just AAA looking games, the gameplay and the narrative is going to fall incredibly flat on a low effort RPG Maker game. It's going to be awful, which is the same problem we've had in previous decades with awful JRPG games flooding the marketplace and just having terrible narratives and stupidity. Even the games that are somewhat relevant, like Kingdom Hearts, still have some pretty terrible narratives and stupidity in them. Gamatsu has yet another Alice Gear Aegis trailer. They are not stopping. Almost every couple days you get a new one of that. And then Hogwarts Legacy being delayed again. I guess if I am never able to actively fix the timeout problem that I'm having, it may not be that big of a deal because the music is still playing. But it's annoying, certainly. And I think I can fix it. I'll just bring the timeouts back up. Alright, now I'm going to very quickly on this Friday rush because A, it's late, and B, it's unlikely that there is going to be any new news. Yeah. They're talking about PAX, or PAX West, or PAX East, one of the PAXs. X-Play and Attack of the Shows seem like they are once again trying to reboot themselves and get people's attention. They're putting a lot of effort into it, but I'm not sure they're really making any quality content, nor do I feel like they are doing anything that is actually working. So, but yeah, I'm still keeping a general eye on G4. There hasn't been any major controversies around them lately. That's at least something. Alright, well, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.